Hi folks, and welcome to the second video in the Alienology 101 series. And today I'd like to talk to you about the concept of dimensionality. Many of you will be familiar with the ideas that many people in the ufology and alienology field talk about when it comes to aliens coming from different dimensions, or being interdimensional or extra-dimensional, or having some other dimensional context to them. And I thought I'd just try and clarify some definitions, some working definitions that might be really useful to us if we're going to undertake serious study to try and understand where our alien friends, or where these alien people are from, and how they interact with ourselves or other places in the cosmos. Now, I wanted to start with a caveat though, and it's an important one, I think, because everything that I'm about to say really needs to be underscored with this caveat. But having said that, that doesn't mean to say that what I'm about to say is not still relevant, because I think it is. So here's the caveat. We as human beings have a very limited understanding of the cosmos and of the universe, and our definitions per se are limited by all kinds of things, but the two greatest limitations I see are our language, our ability to convey something that we think we know, whether it's by the felt sense, the heart, or by the mind, and also limited by our ability to perceive. Now, we perceive that we exist in 4 dimensions in terms of the Cartesian dimensions of length, breadth, width, 3 spatial dimensions, and time. This is a general kind of model that most people in this day and age accept. And what I'd like to say is that as a general model, that works well for us, but I don't think it's true. In addition to that, what I would like to say is that when we think about the idea of dimensions, we're thinking in terms of kind of geometry, if you like, and that is a relationship of one kind of space to another. And I think that fundamentally there's something wrong about that way of perceiving the world. Now, I'm not sure what's wrong, but just a gut feeling that's wrong. So if you were to think, for example, about a human being, I think it would be pretty true to say that we perceive that we exist in 3 dimensions. That, you know, if you took my thumb there, it has a length, it has a breadth, and also has a width. You know, it has the 3 spatial dimensions there, and X, Y, and Z kind of axis would describe the dimensions of my thumb. And if you would look at my thumb as representative of my body, then I'm a 3-dimensional entity, and everything in our world appears to be a 3-dimensional entity. And I think that that's what we see, but that's not necessarily what is true. It is only what we perceive and what our mind is able to translate, perhaps. Maybe the mind is also aware of other things, but not able to translate that. So that's the caveat. And maybe an example of that caveat is we're aware of the electromagnetic spectrum, and human beings have the capacity to see visible light. we cannot see with our eyes into infrared or ultraviolet or gamma radiation or anything else, but we can measure these with particular devices, and other devices can see into these. And we know that some other organisms, like snakes for example, have an ability to perceive heat or infrared. Others appear to be able to perceive ultraviolet. And what we've discovered as well is that there appear to be craft of alien origin and entities of alien origin, perhaps some entities of Earth origin, that appear to exist, but we can only see them in those other spectrums, whether it's ultraviolet or infrared. Now, having said that, I think we can assume that some of these things exist in a three-dimensional form, but some of them may exist in a higher dimensional form. So I want to come back to dimensionality. Let's start by exploring dimensions. So a brief introduction to a dimension. What is a dimension? As far as we're aware, a dimension is a spatial relationship, a relationship in space. So take a piece of paper. A single dot on that piece of paper would represent one dimension. In actuality, it isn't one dimension. It is still three dimensions. But as our eyes would perceive it, we could say that that dot exists in one dimension. If you then add another spatial quality to that dimension, extend it out in either direction, let's turn it into a line, it now has width and length, or breadth and length, whichever two dimensions we want to give it, but it has two dimensions. And if we then extend that object into a third dimension, let's say for example that the object that we were looking at originally was a pencil. When that pencil interacts with the surface of the paper, we're going to see a dot. When we begin to see the interaction from a two-dimensional perspective, we might see, depending on what shape pencil it is, we might see a circle, or we might see a hexagon, and as that pencil moves through the paper, we'll see a three-dimensional object. So that's a really very basic way of understanding dimensionality. Now, what we've tried to do is overlay this with a dimension of time and say that these three-dimensional objects move in relation to some other dimension sequentially somehow, and we've called this time. Now, that whole concept I think is deeply flawed, and I think it is a mental construct, a projection of the mind. But it's the best concept we have for understanding how we function in our reality. But for us to impose that on reality and say this is the way that things are, this is the only way that things are, is definitely a mistake. Now, I can't remember, I think it's the closed string theorists would argue that no, we don't have 4 dimensions, we have 11 dimensions, and I believe they say there are 2 dimensions of time, so there is a forwards and a backwards time. Whereas I think the open string theorists would argue that we have infinite dimensions. The question for me is, does any given three-dimensional object or any given three-dimensional being exist in only 3 dimensions, or does it exist in more than 3 dimensions? And I think that this is a question that will preoccupy many different branches of science for decades, if not centuries, to come. And already I know that mathematicians and physicists are debating that, and there will be new sciences that will come out of whatever understandings that we get out of this. And I suppose to some extent it is always going to come back to consciousness. What is consciousness? And there will be many people who will argue that consciousness projects or exists in these other dimensions. And you might even argue, just a small diversion here, if you are not familiar, learn about the concept of Big Mind Zen by Genpo Roshi. His idea is that we have these aspects of self, and there is also a big mind and a big heart which encompasses all, and some aspect of us is connected to the all. And there are also other ideas like holodynamics that talk about these other dimensions that we can draw from, but these are human ideas. But if you take these human ideas, it does seem quite possible that a human being is more than 3 dimensions, and there are many, many people in the whole New Age movement, and unfortunately that's blurred together with the whole Alienology and ufology movement, who will say that yes, we're not just 3-dimensional beings, we're something else, and then you have all these crazy people talking about the 5th density and all this kind of crap. But I've yet to hear anybody who can really explain it in a coherent way that's on par with, the physicists who talk about, or the mathematicians who were talking about 11 dimensions, or anything more than 3 dimensions. I've yet to hear about it explained in a way that sounds viable and almost testable, dare I say it. But I think that is the future of many human disciplines and many scientific disciplines, to try and understand whether human beings or other biological organisms exist in other dimensions. But once again, I think this whole idea of dimensions will be turned on its head, and when it is turned on its head, so will our reality, our understanding of reality, be turned on its head. So I want to get down to the crux of what I wanted to talk about in this video, and that is the idea of dimensionality being understood from the point of view of interdimensional and intradimensional. So that's I-N-T-E-R and I-N-T-R-A, inter and intra. So I wanted to make some very clear distinctions that I think I'm introducing these concepts because I think they might allow people to conceive of the existence of life elsewhere in a different way to how they've been able to conceive of it. And even though I don't encourage people, I don't think we should get caught up in definitions. I think it is useful for us to put on a different lens, if you like, and to try to understand things with a different concept, a different idea. I mean, some people would say things like paradigm shift. I'm sick of that overly used word, but I guess in essence that's what I'm trying to suggest, that if we reconstruct a different kind of definition, we may understand things differently. So, here's what I propose. Interdimensional, to me, means between dimensions. So if we accept that there is 3 spatial dimensions, then dimension 1, 2 and 3 all exist within us. We don't exist within a 2-dimensional or a 1-dimensional world. We appear to exist within a 3-dimensional world. And we're not sure if anything could exist in a 1 or 2-dimensional world. But certainly we're aware of life in a 3-dimensional world. But there may well be a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th dimensional world. So Interdimensional simply means between those dimensions. So an entity who is able to move interdimensionally is able to come from within those dimensions, between those dimensions, sorry. So it might be that I'm a ninth dimensional entity and I'm able to access the sixth dimension, or I'm a fifth dimensional entity and I'm able to access the third dimension. Or it might be that I'm a three-dimensional entity and I'm able to access the 12th dimension. I'm hesitant to say that lower dimensional beings are able to access higher dimensions. I don't think that is possible at all. I think what's lacking there is an understanding of how many dimensions this being actually occupies. And so, for example, a human being, perhaps we occupy 6 dimensions or 12 dimensions, who knows? But our physical bodies and our general awareness occupy 3 dimensions, sensory awareness. But perhaps consciousness is not bound to a certain number of dimensions, or perhaps it is. But what I would suggest is that any being can access a dimension lower than its own dimension, within its own dimension, or lower than its own dimension. So there's a kind of interdimensional travel, if you like. And for some of these entities, it may not mean travel as we think of physical travel. It may simply mean some kind of shift in consciousness to be able to come to these other dimensions. So that's that basic concept. I could say a lot more about that, but I just want to introduce the idea of interdimensional. And the other idea is intradimensional. So intradimensional is within the same dimension. So for example, let's say that I travel from here in Victoria in southern Australia to London. I've travelled intradimensionally within the same dimension. Let's say I go and have a bath. I've travelled intradimensionally. Let's say I visit my surgeon and have my hernia fixed in a couple of weeks, which I'm going to. I've travelled intradimensionally. Let's say I travel to Jupiter and I make it back. I've travelled intradimensionally. As far as we can tell, I've travelled within the same dimension. And so there may be entities, for example, that exist in the 9th dimension who can travel only within the 9th dimension. Or maybe they're not limited to travelling intradimensionally. They can also travel interdimensionally, but maybe they are limited. So this is the thing about inter and intra. We can't necessarily assume that they're only limited to one form of travel or not. And we can't assume that they're limited to one form of existence or not. But I think the distinction is important between interdimensional and intradimensional, because it might be that some of the very physical, three-dimensional looking beings that we have visiting our planet can only travel within this dimension that we recognize. And yet there may be others who are able to travel interdimensionally from another dimension into our dimension, and yet they may still coexist with their dimension, but they're able to manifest in this dimension. And whether they've travelled physically or in some physical craft, or just with the body, or with some aspect of their dimensionality, I'm not sure. All of those may be possibilities. But can you see that there is clearly many possibilities here if we open up that window? If we consider that we can go that way or we can go that way, both of those things are possible. And I think that what we're seeing with a lot of people from elsewhere is that they appear to be doing things that represent one or both of these forms of dimensionality. So for example, somebody talks about an experience where an ET just enters the room, appears out of nowhere. Yeah, maybe they've just done a beam me up Scotty and just transferred across, but maybe they've accessed another dimensionality within their own dimensionality, and they're able to appear here. And then such beings do things like take people through walls and then lift them up into the craft. So somehow there is something they're able to do to matter. And what I would suggest is that they're changing the dimensionality of matter, whether or not they're making the object that is passed through more permeable, or whether they're making the person who passes through the object more permeable. I'm not sure. I think both are possible. But I think this might just give you a sense that with interdimensional and with intradimensional existences, there also comes the possibility of intradimensional and interdimensional travel, and interdimensional and intradimensional communication. And so this opens up a whole, cosmos, excuse the pun, of possibilities. We really are limited in conceiving of the world just as 3 dimensions and aliens or otherworldly people just exist on another planet somewhere, or another star system. This concept limits us to a 3-dimensional view of the universe. And that's not even really talking about time. I mean, if we were able to understand time from a perspective of intradimensional or interdimensional, that would just turn everything that we understand on its head. And I think what we have to remember is the universe really is this complex. It's incredibly simple and elegant and strange and beautiful, but it is very, very complex. And one day I think we'll develop a cosmology that is both based in understanding consciousness and how there is a level of reality that is not based in dimensions and not based in perception, but there is also another, words kind of fail here, aspect or understanding of reality that is based in dimensions. And one is relative and one is kind of absolute, if you like, but both exist at once. So that's my introduction to the idea of dimensionality. Feel free to leave any comments regarding this, or if you've had any experiences with entities who you felt were interdimensional or intradimensional, or if you've got perhaps another unique perspective on this, feel free to leave comments. See you in video 3.